Every era of American motoring history is filled with icons. The Corvettes, the Thunderbirds, the Mustangs. Cars that shaped generations and defined design. But behind the legends are the leftovers. Forgotten vehicles that barely made a dent in the showroom, much less history. These are not cars that were universally hated or outrageously bad. They simply failed to stand out. Whether due to bland styling, poor marketing, or just existing in the wrong place at the wrong time, these 9 American cars vanished from memory almost as soon as they arrived. This is their brief moment back in the spotlight.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 9. The 1973 model year was a major turning point for General Motors. It marked the debut of GM's Colonnade Intermediates, heavily redesigned mid-size cars with more safety features, larger dimensions, and a shift away from the traditional hardtop look. Among these was a new Chevelle variant, the Chevrolet Laguna. The Laguna was supposed to represent a more refined and premium version of the Chevelle, with more comfort, sleeker styling, and a touch of European flair in its name. Chevrolet hoped to compete with Ford's upscale intermediates like the Gran Torino. But in a lineup already packed with Malibu and Chevelle models, the Laguna failed to carve out a unique identity. The 1973 Chevrolet Laguna was introduced as a replacement for the Chevelle Malibu Sport Coupe. While it shared the same A-body platform and most of the mechanicals, the Laguna featured a urethane front bumper, borrowed in style from the Corvette, for improved crash resistance and a sleeker look. Unique grille and front fascia styling that set it apart visually from other Chevelle. More plush interior materials and standard features meant to position it as a near-luxury mid-size car. Special emblems and trim, including the Laguna nameplate, to suggest upscale aspirations. Despite these differences, it wasn't distinct enough to be seen as a separate model by many buyers. The Malibu name had more familiarity, and the Laguna's position in the lineup was murky at best. Mechanically, the 1973 Laguna was pure Chevelle under the skin. It came with a base 350 cubic inch V8 with modest output, optional 400 and 454 big block V8s, though emissions regulations were starting to strangle performance. GM's reliable but aging 3-speed and 4-speed manual, or the optional 365 big block V8 turbo hydromatic automatic. The Laguna was no performance standout, and though it later spawned the Laguna S3, a NASCAR-friendly version with more flair, the 1973 base model was still more about comfort than corner carving. It had soft suspension tuning, lots of body roll, and uninspired handling. In a year where safety and regulations were beginning to dominate design decisions, performance was already on the decline, and the Laguna didn't escape that fate. To its credit, the 1973 Laguna had some visual flair. The urethane nose made it stand out slightly from its Chevelle siblings. It had cleaner lines and was arguably better integrated than the Malibu or base Chevelle. Inside, the dash and trim gave a more upscale vibe. But overall, in an era when muscle cars were dying and luxury was becoming bloated, the Laguna failed to look genuinely exciting or aspirational. It wasn't flashy like a Monte Carlo or powerful like an SS Chevelle of earlier years. It was just another mid-sized GM car. The Laguna sold fairly modestly, especially compared to the Malibu. The main reasons were confusing placement in the lineup. Buyers weren't sure why they should pick it over a better-known Malibu. Lack of strong marketing. The Laguna wasn't heavily promoted, so many buyers didn't even realize it existed. Timing. The early 1970s were a turbulent time. With the oil crisis looming and performance on the decline, buyers wanted either economy or luxury, not a vague blend of the two. Chevrolet quickly responded by discontinuing the original Laguna after just 1 year. It returned in 1974 as the Laguna Type S3, a more performance-oriented model with NASCAR aspirations. But the base Laguna of 1973 was quietly swept under the rug. Today, the 1973 Chevrolet Laguna rarely appears in classic car conversations. Even Chevelle enthusiasts often focus on the earlier muscle car years, 1964 to 1972, or the later Laguna S3 models that made waves in NASCAR. Its legacy is limited to being the first use of the Laguna name in Chevy's lineup. A case study in brand confusion, where too many similar trims dilute the impact of each. An example of how GM's sprawling model strategy in the 1970s often led to forgettable vehicles that lacked focus. The 1973 Chevrolet Laguna tried to be many things: a more stylish Chevelle, a comfortable cruiser, a hint of European flair. But in trying to straddle multiple markets without fully committing to one, it ended up being forgettable. It wasn't fast enough to be sporty, luxurious enough to be aspirational, or affordable enough to be a budget buy. In the end, it was simply a nameplate experiment that came and went in a single model year, overshadowed by its siblings and quickly buried in the shadows of automotive history. Number 8. The mid-1970s were a golden age for the personal luxury coupe. Those long-hooded, opera-windowed, vinyl-top machines meant to offer middle-class status without high-end luxury car prices. General Motors dominated this market with the Chevrolet Monte Carlo, Pontiac Grand Prix, and Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. Ford, not wanting to miss out, responded with the Ford Elite, which first appeared in 1974 as the Gran Torino Elite and was simply called Elite by 1975 and 1976. It was wedged into a very awkward spot between the Ford Torino and the more upscale Ford Thunderbird. That vague positioning would be the Elite's downfall. At its core, the 1976 Ford Elite was a rebadged, reskinned version of the midsize Gran Torino, with plenty of visual flourishes meant to evoke luxury. Distinctive opera windows with faux chrome trim, heavily padded vinyl roofs, long wide hood with squared-off fender peaks, wire wheel covers and bodyside moldings, plush interiors with wood-grain dash accents and thick velour seating. Its mission was clear: go head-to-head with the Monte Carlo and look like a Thunderbird, but without the Thunderbird price. While the Elite looked premium, it wasn't especially exciting underneath. By 1976, it rode on a 114-inch wheelbase and came with a base 351 cubic inch Windsor 5.8 with optional 400 and 460 V8s for extra cost, a standard 3-speed automatic transmission, rear-wheel drive with soft suspension and very floaty handling, standard power steering and power brakes, but no real performance credentials. The Elite wasn't fast, nimble, or efficient. It was comfortable, yes, but so was every other personal luxury coupe on the market. With rising fuel prices and smog regulations choking engines, buyers weren't getting much more than looks. The biggest issue with the 1976 Ford Elite wasn't its comfort or styling. It was its total lack of a clear identity. It was too close to the Thunderbird in looks, but without the prestige. It was too expensive compared to the base Torino, but offered only superficial upgrades. Its name, Elite, sounded like a trim level, not a standalone model. Marketing was vague, and buyers were confused about where it fit. In a market where image was everything, the Elite came across as an imitator rather than an innovator. It looked like a Thunderbird knockoff, and even Ford seemed to lose interest in promoting it as anything more. Interestingly, the Elite did sell moderately well at first, thanks to its good looks and the personal luxury craze. In fact, in 1975, it outsold the Thunderbird. But that wasn't necessarily a victory. It created internal competition between Ford models. By 1976, Ford saw the writing on the wall. Instead of continuing the Elite, the Thunderbird was downsized onto the Elite's platform for 1977. That meant the Thunderbird became the new Elite, and the Elite itself just vanished. Today, the Ford Elite is nearly forgotten, even by vintage Ford enthusiasts. Unlike the Torino, which has muscle car recognition, or the Thunderbird, which has legacy and luxury cachet, the Elite is just a blip. No racing pedigree, no cultural footprint, no performance legacy, no design innovation. The Elite is a textbook example of a badge-engineered placeholder, a model introduced to quickly cash in on a trend without a long-term vision. The 1976 Ford Elite was a car that did nothing especially wrong, but also nothing especially right. It rode a wave of personal luxury demand without offering anything new or distinct. Ford essentially created a placeholder between two better-known cars and hoped the name Elite would convince buyers they were getting something special. But when the Thunderbird was reborn on the same chassis the following year, the Elite was quietly retired. No fanfare, no farewell edition, just a name deleted from brochures and memory. And today, the Elite stands as a cautionary tale in brand strategy. A car with no clear place, no clear purpose, and no lasting legacy. Number 7, by 1980, American Motors Corporation, AMC, was deep into its financial struggles. The once innovative underdog that gave us the Gremlin, Pacer, and Jeep CJ5 was now hanging on by a thread, caught between the big three and a surge of small, fuel-efficient imports. Into this crowded and competitive space came the AMC Concord, a compact car that AMC dressed up in pseudo-luxury trim in a last-ditch attempt to win buyers who wanted economy and class. The Concord DL for deluxe and was the top trim version, AMC's way of saying, sure, we're small, but we can be upscale too. The Concord wasn't an entirely new vehicle. It was heavily based on the aging AMC Hornet platform, dating back to 1970. But to AMC's credit, they gave it a decent restyle with cleaner lines, softer edges, and more upscale finishes to keep it competitive in a changing market. The DL trim level added touches like upgraded cloth or vinyl upholstery, simulated wood grain dashboard and door trim, deluxe hubcaps or styled steel wheels, padded vinyl roof, optional, extra sound-deadening material for a quieter ride, air conditioning and AM/FM stereo as available luxuries. You could get the DL in several body styles: two-door sedan, four-door sedan, or station wagon, with the wagon surprisingly being the most popular. AMC was banking on middle-class pragmatists, folks who couldn't swing a new Buick or Olds, but still wanted to feel like they weren't settling. While AMC gave the Concord DL a facelift and some creature comforts, underneath it was still a Hornet at heart. Engines offered in 1980 included 2.0-liter, 4 engines sourced from Audi Volkswagen underpowered and noisy, 3.3-liter inline 6 AMCs, 199-A smoother but outdated choice, 0.42L inline 6-A MC258-. Durable but far from refined, the 4.2L inline 6 was the most desirable, known for reliability, if not performance. Transmission choices were basic: 3-speed manual, 4-speed manual, or 3-speed automatic. Driving dynamics: soft suspension, numb steering, and plenty of body roll. But that was par for the course in 1980, especially for a compact that was built for comfort, not performance. The Concord DL's biggest struggle was convincing people it was really a luxury car. AMC simply didn't have the prestige of Cadillac, Lincoln, or even Mercury. The DL trim added more vinyl and fake wood than true refinement. The body design was clearly old school, especially compared to sleek imports like the Datsun 510 or newer front-wheel drive competitors. Buyers weren't fooled. The Concord looked and felt like an old car dressed up in a tuxedo, and not a particularly well-fitting one. The Concord sold reasonably well in its early years, 1978 to 1979, especially among older buyers in rural and suburban areas who trusted AMC's sturdy engineering. But by 1980, things were changing fast. Interest rates were climbing. Fuel economy became king. AMC's dealer network was shrinking. Japanese and European compacts were proving to be more advanced and efficient. Even the DL trim couldn't hide the Concord's dated underpinnings, and sales dropped. AMC tried to pivot again with the introduction of the Renault-based alliance in the years that followed, signaling the end of the Concord line. Today, the 1980 AMC Concord DL is rarely remembered, even among car enthusiasts. It never developed a cult following like the Gremlin or Pacer. It wasn't weird enough to be cool, nor luxurious enough to be collectible. Its legacy is more about what it represented, the last gasp of AMC's independence before Renault stepped in. A reminder of how the US automakers tried to luxury wash their compacts instead of reinventing them. An early effort to blend comfort and economy, a segment that would later be dominated by the Japanese and later Koreans. The 1980 AMC Concord DL was AMC's attempt to put lipstick on a Hornet. It wasn't a terrible car, just outdated, outclassed, and out of time. In a decade where innovation was desperately needed, the Concord DL leaned on soft trim, nostalgia, and brand loyalty. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough. It now rests in the archives of automotive history as a footnote from a fading brand, a sedan that tried to offer middle-class class, but ended up being just another casualty of Detroit's downsizing era. Number 6. By the mid-1980s, Pontiac was fully committed to its slogan, "We build excitement." That excitement often came not from raw performance, but from turbo badges, ground effects, and digital dashboards. The company wanted to inject adrenaline into economy cars, and the Sunbird was a prime candidate. Built on GM's J-body platform, the Sunbird was originally a compact meant to compete with cars like the Ford Escort and Dodge Shadow. But Pontiac wasn't going to settle for bland. They added a GT trim and a turbocharger, then wrapped the whole thing in plastic body cladding and pop-up headlights. The result? The 1987 Sunbird GT Turbo, a car that looked fast, sounded promising, but never truly delivered lasting excitement. The 1987 Sunbird GT Turbo was as 1980s as it gets. Pop-up headlights, the ultimate cool feature of the decade. Two-tone paint options, often with wild contrast colors like red and silver. Ground effects and spoilers, adding weight but not much function. Turbo badges, plastered everywhere to remind you this was no base model. It screamed performance, even if it whispered it under the hood. Still, for buyers who wanted to look like they had a hot coupe, or convertible, without breaking the bank, the GT Turbo looked the part. The heart of the 1987 Sunbird GT Turbo was a 1.8-liter SOHC inline-4, turbocharged and intercooled, producing a modest 150 horsepower and 180 pound-feet of torque. That might sound decent, until you remember, it was mated to a 3-speed automatic or a notchy 5-speed manual. The car weighed over 2,600 pounds. The front-wheel drive layout struggled with torque steer. The engine was rough and laggy, with boost kicking in abruptly, often too late to be useful. Yes, it was quicker than your aunt's celebrity wagon, but not by much, and definitely not by GT standards. The suspension setup was standard GM J-body fare. McPherson struts in front, semi-independent torsion beam in the rear, with minimal upgrades over base models. The GT Turbo did have larger wheels and tires, but the chassis still flexed like cooked spaghetti in hard turns. Steering feedback was vague. Braking was adequate, but not confidence-inspiring. The ride leaned toward bouncy rather than composed, especially in the convertible version. So while it looked aggressive, the actual driving experience felt like a base model with stickers and stiffer springs. Inside, Pontiac leaned hard into tech chic. Digital gauges, check turbo boost lights, check equalizer sliding Delco stereo. Absolutely. Soft touch plastics? Not so much. While it felt futuristic at the time, the interior aged quickly. Squeaks and rattles were common by 50,000 miles, and build quality was never the Sunbird's strong suit. On the bright side, it was fairly roomy for a compact, and the convertible variant did give you a bit of open-air flair. The Sunbird GT Turbo had decent initial sales, mainly because it looked sporty and came in at a lower price than a Mustang GT or Nissan 200SX. It appealed to young buyers who wanted speed on a budget, even if they didn't get much of it. But there were problems. The turbo engine had reliability issues. Oil seals, lag, and overheating were common complaints. Competitors like the VW GTI, Toyota Celica, and Honda CRX Sci ran rings around it in performance, reliability, and resale value. Even within GM, cars like the Beretta GTZ soon outclassed it. The Sunbird name itself didn't evoke performance. It sounded more like a beach cruiser. By the early 1990s, the Turbo GT quietly vanished, and the Sunbird was replaced by the forgettable Pontiac Sunfire in 1995. The 1987 Pontiac Sunbird GT Turbo is rarely remembered today, and for good reason. It didn't revolutionize anything. It wasn't fast enough to be a sleeper. It wasn't refined enough to be a serious GT. It wasn't weird enough to be collectible. It was, in essence, a styling exercise with boosted expectations, a turbo badge without a turbo soul. The 1987 Sunbird GT Turbo is a prime example of 1980s automotive marketing over substance. It had the graphics, the spoilers, the pop-up lights, and the buzzword of the decade, turbo, but none of it added up to a lasting impact. It exists now mostly in forgotten brochures and faded memories. A car that tried to play in the performance league with a budget parts bin and a lot of attitude. In short, all bark, little boost. Number 5. The early 1950s were a golden era for the American automobile industry. The economy was booming, suburbia was expanding, and car buyers wanted more than just transportation. They wanted style, comfort, power, and prestige. By 1954, the big three automakers, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, were racing to offer cutting-edge designs, dazzling chrome, powerful V8 engines, and flashy two-tone paint jobs. Cars were rapidly transforming into lifestyle statements. In the midst of all this, Dodge was trying to reinvent itself, but it still had one foot stuck in the past. The 1954 Dodge Meadowbrook is a perfect example of that awkward in-between moment. It was solid, sensible, and utterly forgettable. The Meadowbrook was Dodge's mid-range full-size sedan, sandwiched between the base-level Coronet and the slightly fancier Custom Royal, which would debut later. In many ways, it was a carryover from earlier post-war designs, failing to fully capture the futuristic flair that competitors were offering. Dodge positioned it as reliable, affordable, and modest, an ideal car for middle-class Americans who didn't want to draw attention. Unfortunately, that's exactly what made it so easy to overlook. The 1954 Meadowbrook's exterior looked more like something from the late 1940 Esselnassen slab-sided bodywork with minimal curves. Low, unremarkable roofline. Tiny, conservative grille with modest chrome. Bland taillights and dull rear fascia. Steel wheels with basic hubcaps. While Chevy and Ford were embracing bold lines and wraparound windshields, the Meadowbrook looked like it was still recovering from World War II. In an age of expressive car design, it simply faded into the background. Even the two-tone paint options couldn't add much excitement to its boxy, conservative lines. Under the hood, the Meadowbrook offered a 230 cubic inch flathead inline six, producing around 110 horsepower. This engine, while durable, was decidedly underwhelming for the era, especially when V8s were becoming the norm. Acceleration was sluggish, top speed was modest, and the optional gyro-torque automatic transmission, a semi-automatic with quirks, wasn't particularly smooth or advanced. Buyers looking for performance were already being lured away by Ford's new OHV V8 or Chevy's upcoming small block. Inside, the Meadowbrook was simple to the point of austerity: cloth bench seats, basic instrumentation, minimal trim or ornamentation, optional heater and radio, but little else. The dashboard was a flat painted metal slab with basic knobs and gauges. While it got the job done, it didn't evoke luxury or modernity. Even by 1954 standards, it looked dated. This might have worked in the late 1940s, but in 1954, when buyers wanted glamour, fins, and flash, it felt like Dodge wasn't even trying. The Meadowbrook appealed to a specific kind of buyer: rural drivers who valued durability over dazzle, older customers resistant to styling fads, budget-conscious families looking for a basic full-size sedan. But this market was shrinking fast. The 1950s were all about optimism, forward-looking design, and rising consumer expectations. The Meadowbrook, with its muted styling and basic powertrain, felt like it belonged to the previous decade. Sales of the Meadowbrook were uninspiring, and by 1955, the model was gone. Dodge was rapidly pivoting toward newer, flashier designs, ushered in by stylist Virgil Exner, who would soon revolutionize Chrysler's entire look with the forward look. As a result, the Meadowbrook left no significant legacy. It spawned no notable variants. It made no impact on automotive design or performance. It was a car that existed, reliable, competent, and entirely forgettable. Today, the 1954 Dodge Meadowbrook is mostly found in old family photo albums or parked quietly in a classic car show where onlookers walk right past it to get to a Bel Air or Thunderbird. It's rarely restored, it's rarely collected, and it's rarely remembered. And in a way, that's fitting, because the Meadowbrook was never meant to stand out. It was built for an era that was quickly moving past it. The 1954 Dodge Meadowbrook is a textbook example of a car built just a little too late and with too little ambition. In a decade when America fell in love with cars that were bigger, bolder, and more exciting, the Meadowbrook was the quiet kid in the corner. Number 4. By 1966, the American car market was segmented and competitive. The muscle car era was in full swing, compacts were gaining traction, and full-size sedans still dominated the family car segment. Plymouth, Chrysler's budget-minded division, had a 3-tiered lineup in its midsize class. Belvedere II, the stripped-down base model, Belvedere II, the mid-level option. Satellite, the Sportier, more stylish top trim. Add to that the full-size Fury line, and you had a confusing marketing puzzle. Somewhere in all of this, the Belvedere II was intended to be the practical, sensible choice, but that very sensibility is what made it so forgettable. The Belvedere name had been around since the early 1950s, but by 1966, it had been demoted to a mid-size platform, just one rung above economy cars and one below Plymouth's more powerful or luxurious offerings. The Belvedere II was supposed to offer a comfortable interior for families, a modest touch of style, a range of engine options, from thrifty 6-cylinders to big block V8s, practicality without the frills or flash of the Satellite. Unfortunately, that made it the automotive equivalent of beige wallpaper. It worked, but no one got excited about it. The 1966 Belvedere II sported the same boxy, squared-off styling that characterized many Chrysler products of the mid-60s. A flat grille flanked by dual headlights, subtle side creases and restrained chrome trim, a long, flat hood and slab-sided bodywork, modest rear fins that looked like an afterthought. The look was neat and clean, but lacked personality, especially when compared to the more sculpted and aggressive designs from Ford and GM. The Satellite had more chrome, flashier trim, and sport-oriented styling. The Fury was larger and more elegant. The Belvedere II just sort of existed. The Belvedere II wasn't short on engine options. Buyers could choose from a basic 225 cubic inch slant 6, around 145 horsepower, a 273 or 318 V8 for modest power, a 361, 383 or 426 Commando 5.8 if you wanted real muscle. While that might sound exciting, most Belvedere IIs were ordered with the lower-end V8s aimed at family buyers, not performance junkies. And if someone was looking for power, they usually bought the Satellite or the even more infamous Belvedere GTX, introduced in '67, which were marketed more aggressively and had stronger identities. Inside, the Belvedere II was exactly what you'd expect from a mid-tier '60s sedan. Bench seats, covered in vinyl or basic cloth, a metal dashboard with analog gauges and push-button radio, no-frills switchgear and minimal luxury features, optional air conditioning, power steering, and power brakes. It was a nice place to be if your expectations were low. It lacked the bright trim and buckets and console layout of the Satellite or the upscale materials of the Fury. Functional? Yes. Memorable? The Belvedere II's buyer was likely a middle-class family man looking for a second car, a budget-conscious commuter, someone who didn't care about flash, speed, or luxury. Unfortunately, that meant the Belvedere II didn't inspire any loyalty or excitement. It wasn't a dream car, it was a placeholder. It was the car you bought until you could afford a Satellite, or the car you bought for your kid when they graduated high school, or the company car that got passed around the fleet. The Belvedere II wasn't a sales flop. It sold reasonably well because it was priced right and reliable, but it had no halo, no cultural footprint, no starring role in movies, no legendary performance package tied to its name. When Plymouth revamped its lineup in 1967 and '68, the Belvedere name stuck around but lost significance. Eventually, it was absorbed into other trims and then disappeared entirely by the early 1970s. Today, the Belvedere name is best remembered for two things: the GTX and Roadrunner models that evolved from it. The 1950s Belvedere hardtops, especially the 1957 version. The 1966 Belvedere II, forgotten. Even Mopar fans rarely bring it up unless it's a rusted shell sitting behind a barn with a big block swap. Restorers don't seek them out. Collectors rarely mention them, and the average car enthusiast might not even know it existed. The 1966 Plymouth Belvedere II is a classic example of a car that was never meant to shine. It did its job, it moved people, and then it was replaced. It wasn't bad, it was just overwhelmed, overshadowed by the satellite's flash, outmuscled by the GTX and Roadrunner, dwarfed by the Fury's size and prestige. In the end, the Belvedere II was the kind of car people forgot they ever owned, a workhorse of the mid-60s, there when needed, gone without a trace. Number 3, by 1970, Mercury was caught in the middle of Ford's product ladder. Positioned between the blue-collar Ford and the luxury Lincoln, Mercury often struggled to define its own brand identity. It dabbled in performance, flirted with luxury, and tried to appeal to both the younger muscle car crowd and the established luxury buyer. The Marauder X100 was Mercury's attempt to merge these two worlds, a bold, powerful coupe that could battle both full-size muscle cars and personal luxury cruisers. But it was also a car no one quite asked for, and very few remember today. The 1970 Marauder X100 was the final iteration of the Marauder nameplate, first introduced in the late 1950s. For 1969 and 1970, the Marauder was reborn as Mercury's answer to the Ford Thunderbird, the Pontiac Grand Prix, the Buick Riviera, and even the Dodge Charger in luxury trim. The X100 was the high-performance version, sporting a massive engine, unique styling touches, and a package that screamed big American excess. The 1970 Marauder X100 was big, very big. It rode on a 121-inch wheelbase and stretched nearly 19 feet long. Visually, it blended cues from the Lincoln Continental, Mark III, formal roofline, hidden headlights, the Ford Galaxie LTD, underlying structure and layout, and a bit of muscle car aggression, especially in the rear. Notable features included a sports roof fastback roofline, sharply sloped with minimal rear glass visibility, vacuum-operated hideaway headlights, a unique tail panel with full-width rear lights and brushed metal trim, big chrome bumpers and turbine-style wheel covers. It was sleek for its size, but that size made it feel more like a land yacht than a true muscle car. The X100 packs serious muscle, 429 cubic inch 4-barrel V8, factory rated at 360 horsepower and massive torque, dual exhaust, performance suspension, and rear sway bar, 3-speed automatic transmission. This gave the 100X100 impressive straight-line power for such a heavy beast, over 4,400 pounds curb weight, though it wasn't a corner carver by any means. It could roast the tires and cruise the boulevard, but that was the extent of its performance personality. Inside, the X100 was more personal luxury than performance coupe. Bucket seats with a center console, rare for a Mercury of the era, simulated wood grain trim and padded vinyl dash. Full-gauge cluster, though performance-focused instrumentation was minimal. Standard air conditioning, AM/FM radio, and power accessories. Thick carpeting and extra sound deadening material. It wanted to be a gentleman's Grand Prix, but unlike the Pontiac, the Mercury lacked the market cachet and sporty reputation. Despite its bold specs and unique styling, the Marauder X100 sold poorly. Fewer than 6,000 units were built for 1970 and just over 9,000 in 1969. It was overshadowed by the Thunderbird, which had stronger brand recognition. Buyers who wanted true muscle opted for Torinos, Mustangs, or Cougars. Luxury buyers stuck with Lincoln or higher trim Mercurys like the Marquis. It sat awkwardly between segments, too sporty for the traditional Mercury buyer, too heavy and obscure for the performance crowd. After 1970, Mercury quietly pulled the plug on the Marauder line. It was clear the X100 had no place in an evolving marketplace. The muscle car market was already shrinking by 1971 due to insurance costs and regulations. Personal luxury was consolidating around Thunderbird, Grand Prix, and Riviera. Mercury shifted its attention back to more conventional luxury and family models. The Marauder name wouldn't return until a brief revival in 2003 to 2004 with the performance-based Grand Marquis variant, another niche vehicle with a cult following. Today, the 1970 Marauder X11 is a unicorn, rarely seen at shows or auctions, largely forgotten by all but hardcore Mercury fans, difficult to restore due to limited parts availability, overshadowed by its GM and Ford contemporaries. However, its unique blend of 429 big block power, fastback styling, and luxury intentions make it a fascinating oddball from the final days of full-size American muscle. The 1970 Mercury Marauder X100 tried to do everything. Be a muscle car and a luxury cruiser, be distinctive, yet built on mainstream platforms, be bold enough to challenge better-known rivals. But it ended up being too much car with too little identity. It was caught in a no-man's land of marketing confusion and changing consumer tastes. The fact that most people, even classic car buffs, can't recall it today says everything. In the end, it's a forgotten heavyweight that deserves more respect for what it tried to be, even if it was doomed from the start. Number 2. By the mid-1970s, the American full-size sedan was on life support. Fuel prices were high, insurance premiums were punishing, and emissions regulations were choking once proud V8s. Yet Dodge, like many American manufacturers, kept pumping out oversized luxury barges, hoping that prestige and chrome could still move units. Enter the 1977 Dodge Royal Monaco Brougham, a car that looked like a relic the moment it hit the showroom floor. The Royal Monaco was Dodge's top-of-the-line full-size sedan in 1977, and the Brougham trim was meant to represent the height of plushness and prestige within that already lofty tier. But behind all the grandeur, it was simply a badge-engineered Chrysler product, built on the aging C-body platform, and long overdue for replacement. 1977 would be its final year, not just for the Royal Monaco nameplate, but for the C-body full-size Dodge sedan entirely. Visually, the Royal Monaco Brougham was the archetype of a 1970s land yacht. Gigantic chrome bumpers with massive rubber impact strips, a squared-off formal roofline with opera windows, vinyl top naturally, hidden headlamps behind vacuum-operated doors, often stuck open, wire wheel covers and enough badging to fill a dealership parts bin. It was a car built to impress the neighbors in the driveway, not on the road. Despite its name and appearance, it blended into the fleet of similar-looking Chryslers, Plymouths, and even Fords and Buicks from the era. One could be forgiven for not knowing exactly what it was, even while looking at the badge. Under the hood, the Royal Monaco Brougham still packed big displacement V8 power, on paper at least. Typical engine options included 360 cubic inch V8, base engine, adequate but unimpressive, 400 cubic inch V8, mid-level torque, and smoother performance 440 cubic inches V8. The top dog big block, rated at just 195 horsepower due to emissions tuning. While it had the capacity for highway cruising, the power-to-weight ratio was tragic. We're talking 0 to 60 in 12+ seconds for the top trim engine. The 440 was a shadow of its late 60s self. Handling, forgettable. Braking, marginal. Ride, cushy to the point of floaty. It was a car that excelled at straight lines and naps, not excitement. Step inside the Royal Monaco Brougham and you were met with plush bench seats with velour or optional leather, fake wood grain on the dash and doors, optional power everything, windows, locks, seat, a giant steering wheel and a dash layout that hadn't changed much since 1971. Minimal instrumentation, idiot lights over gauges. It was all show and very little substance. The Brougham name was tacked on to give the illusion of Cadillac-level luxury, but this was a big Dodge wearing a tuxedo 2 sizes too big. By 1977, the automotive landscape had shifted drastically. GM had downsized its full-size line, Chevy Impala, Pontiac Bonneville, etc., with great success. Buyers were moving toward intermediate and even compact cars. Gas prices were still a concern. Emissions regulations were increasing every year. The Royal Monaco Brougham looked and felt like a leftover from 1973, and most buyers knew it. Dodge sold far fewer of them than in previous years. Worse, police departments, once a major buyer of the Royal Monaco, began shifting to smaller, more manageable sedans. 1977 was the final year of production for the Dodge Royal Monaco. Chrysler Corporation downsized its full-size lineup, and Dodge pivoted focus toward intermediate models like the Diplomat. There was no direct replacement. The big plush Dodge sedan quietly left the market, and most people didn't notice or care. Today, the Royal Monaco Brougham is nearly extinct, rarely seen at auctions, not sought after by collectors, often mistaken for other cars from the era. Survivors often exist only as neglected yard cars or oddball finds. The Royal Monaco Brougham's legacy is mostly in name only. It had no significant cultural impact, no performance reputation, no design innovation, no niche among muscle fans, luxury buffs, or collectors. It is, at best, a curious footnote from the last gasps of big American sedans before downsizing took over. It represented everything that was about to change, and everything that no longer worked. The 1977 Dodge Royal Monaco Brougham sounds like it should have been something special, something grand, powerful, and luxurious. Instead, it was a bloated, aging, uninspired sedan wearing a majestic badge. It had presence, sure, but little else. Its end marked the death of the traditional full-size Dodge, and few tears were shed. Today, it survives in obscurity, rarely honored and almost never remembered, except perhaps for its brief appearance as a police car in the Blues Brothers. Even then, the movie made it more memorable than Dodge ever could. Number 1. By the early 1980s, General Motors found itself grappling with shifting consumer preferences and a rapidly evolving automotive landscape. The Chevrolet Citation, first introduced in 1980, was part of GM's ambitious X-body compact platform designed to compete with smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles that were dominating the market in the wake of the 1970s oil crises. However, despite its grand ambitions, the Citation was widely regarded as a failure, plagued by quality issues, poor design, and a reputation for being one of GM's worst offerings in decades. So when the Chevrolet Citation X11 was released in 1982, it was part of an effort to salvage some level of performance and prestige for the X-body, hoping that a sportier model could redeem its tarnished reputation. But in the end, the X11 is mostly forgotten today, despite its bold performance intentions. The Citation X11 was introduced as the performance-oriented variant of the Chevrolet Citation, a compact car that initially launched as a front-wheel drive FWD economy car. General Motors was looking to diversify its offerings, and by introducing a sportier version, they hoped to appeal to younger buyers and shift the perception of the Citation as a mere economy car. The X11 came equipped with a 2.8-liter V6 engine producing 135 horsepower, paired with either a 4-speed manual or automatic transmission. Sporty handling features, including sport-tuned suspension, quicker steering, and wider tires for improved cornering, distinctive trim with blacked-out grille, fender flares, and unique badging. Special interior options, including bucket seats and a custom dashboard. It was designed to provide a balance of performance and practicality, with a focus on handling and sporty features, but still offering the everyday comfort expected from a compact car. While the Chevrolet Citation X11 had aspirations of performance, it fell short in many critical areas. Power output. At 135 horsepower, the Citation X11's V6 engine wasn't anything to write home about, especially when compared to other performance-oriented vehicles of the era. Acceleration. The car could manage 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 9.5 seconds, which was decent for its time, but nothing spectacular, particularly when compared to true sports cars or even more established performance compacts like the Ford Mustang or Chevy Camaro. Handling. While the sport-tuned suspension was an improvement over the standard Citation, it still lacked the agility and precision that buyers in this category expected. The ride was stiffer, but the X11 didn't offer the kind of performance handling that might have made it a true competitor to the more successful sporty offerings of the era. In many ways, the Citation X11 was more of a cosmetic upgrade rather than a true performance machine. While it offered some enhanced features, the overall driving experience was still hampered by the Citation's inherent limitations. It simply couldn't compete with its more established rivals in terms of performance or reputation. One of the biggest challenges the Citation X11 faced was the legacy of the Citation itself. The entire X-body platform was known for its poor build quality, with common issues such as electrical problems, excessive road noise, rust issues, premature engine failure. While GM had hoped that the X11's sporty features would overshadow the general quality issues, the car was still rooted in a flawed platform. By the time the X11 was released, many consumers were already skeptical of the Citation as a whole, and these problems persisted despite the car's sporty aspirations. Despite the performance tweaks, the X11 could not shake off the reputation of the regular Citation, which was already seen as a lackluster economy car with cheap materials and uninspiring driving dynamics. While GM had high hopes for the Citation X11, it never really caught on with consumers. In 1982, the compact performance market was competitive, with cars like the Chevy Camaro, Ford Mustang, and Dodge Omni GLH offering stronger performance and greater brand appeal. Even in the compact car category, vehicles like the Volkswagen GTI were already setting the standard for affordable, fun-to-drive hatchbacks. The X11's limited appeal led to a relatively short production run. While sales numbers weren't a complete disaster, the Citation X11 was quickly overshadowed by better, more established performance options, and it never achieved the same level of respect or recognition as its competition. By the time the Citation was discontinued in 1985, the X11 was largely forgotten in favor of new, more competent models.